What if I do this, doesn't work, right? It's going to stay in my biodata. People are going to talk about it.
How would we define a CMO in 2030 and what would be the change from, say, 2020 to 2030 for a CMO?
I've noticed with a lot of startups I work with is that Gen Z doesn't prefer polished, well-produced advertising, right? They want real, authentic, interactive communication.
What, according to you, is that one emerging technology you believe is a little overhyped and one that is underappreciated?
I'm going to continue to be market leaders for various times. So sometimes you got to let a human intuition override numbers and research.
Hello, guys. Welcome to Insightful Exchanges. This is our attempt to get senior people to talk to us about the challenges, especially in marketing, which we are facing and how things have changed, where building brand was a little difficult in 90s and 2000 to becoming increasingly difficult in this age. I have Lloyd Mathias, who is a friend and maybe one of the most knowledgeable guys in India, has had a track record which speaks for himself. And I have Bhavi, who's a 20-year-old girl doing her bachelor's in Bombay. So we wanted to get a Gen Z perspective. Lloyd, would you want to say anything about yourself?
No, thanks, Sandeep. Always a pleasure chatting with you in the real world through a podcast any which way. So thanks for being here. And yeah, if you want me to say a few things, I've been around the block a while, old corporate slave. Started my career back in the late 80s, early 90s. I started off with Onida and then moved to Pepsi. I had a long stint in Pepsi, almost 14 years. I used to head the flavor category after doing a few sales roles. So launched Mountain Dew in India and headed 7-Up, Merida, Aquafina, the whole range. And thereafter moved to another exciting category, mobile handsets. I was the head of sales and marketing of Motorola. And briefly did a stint in telecom, launching Tata Docomo. And my last corporate stint was as marketing head for HP. That's the printer PC company. I was based out of India, handling the entire APAC region. I currently do a couple of things. I work with or partner with an early stage fund where I look after a handful of companies. I have investments in a few early stage companies, so work a lot with founders and startups. And I sit on 6 company boards as an independent director.
So you actually make change happen.
Try to. We all believe we make a lot more change happen than it actually happens. But yes, we're little cogs in the wheel.
Bhavi, would you go first?
Okay, sure. I would actually want to start that since over the years you've seen so many different consumer generations evolve. Let me start with this, that how has Gen Z consumer behavior surprised you compared to the older segments? And how has that shaped the marketing playbook today?
Yeah, I think Gen Z has been refreshingly different. And I know it's fashionable to kind of, compress everything into one thing, but I have seen a very notable change. And I would say it's kind of got accelerated literally in the course of the pandemic, right? As this new generation has kind of become decision makers their own way, a lot of them just graduating from high school and college. So I think one big difference I see is that Gen Z per se tends to be a lot more authentic. They're very much in touch with themselves. They know what they want and they know how to get it. At least they think they know how to get it. And I think that's refreshing, right? So having a lot of clarity of purpose is the one thing that I like the most, right? So they prefer authenticity to perfection, right? So work in progress or beta is a way of life, which is very refreshing and positive. The second, as I've noticed with a lot of startups I work with, is that Gen Z doesn't prefer polished, well-produced advertising, right? They want real, authentic, interactive communication, right? Where they can have a say, right? So it's not so much top down where you build this super slick 30-second commercial. So I think that's the other part. The other thing is attention spans are shrinking. They want short, snackable content. So reels, YouTube shorts, quick forwards always works. I think in their world, one thing I notice is creators are celebrities, right? You don't have to be this movie star or a great sports player, but if you're a creator, you've got a good sense of humor, you've got good takes on things, that's good. I think they're more comfortable with a kind of short format. And meme culture is part of it, I guess, because of their, kind of internet fluency, right? And of course, they like authenticity. They like more realism. They don't like to be preached to. And I think all these are nice, it's refreshing, and to my mind, largely positive, right? They've been a more unpretentious, in touch with the world generation, knowing what they want. And they also have a reasonably well developed social side, right? They are concerned about environment like they should. They are concerned about social issues. They are concerned about inequity. So I think the values is another thing that I love and admire about Gen Z.
That's great insight. I would actually take this takeaway. Sandeep, over to you.
I think I have a question linked to this. All these memes and influencer are fine, but I remember being involved in launching LG in India, and we did a 4-page ad across all dailies in the Sun Times, Times of India to launch a big brand. We were not launching, we were not introducing, we were introducing LG in India. But how do you create impact and how do you do brand building today where people's attention spans are 5 seconds or 3 seconds and they don't read too much anyway?
Great question. I would say the platform of doing a channel block, right? Bhavi won't be familiar, but back in the 80s or 90s, when there were a handful of channels, you could do a channel block. At 9 o'clock, you could buy a 60-second slot across 5-6 channels and, make sure anyone who's watching TV in India gets to see your ad. I think those days are gone. So I think now the only way to create impact is to tell a interesting story visually in a short span of time that is deeply linked to your brand. So staying authentic, saying a real story in a short form of, and being able to amplify it across various media vehicles. Influencers on social media, maybe some experiential marketing, some moment marketing, something that touches a consumer life. If there's an India cricket match, taking a small theme out of that plugs into your campaign. So I think the ability to kind of do a surround sound is the one way you can amplify. But you don't have the luxury of doing a mega blog or even a front page in a newspaper. I mean, you have to recognize that a very small percentage of the country reads a paper. Anyone below 25 gets his news out of Twitter or other sources, in shorts or Reddit. So I think the effort is much more, but you have to use various mediums to reach an audience, and you have to ensure very consistent amplification and make sure that the idea resonates and emotionally connects with a consumer. That's the way you can create impact.
Oh,
So in short, what you're saying is that to target a generation, one has to work hard or harder.
What I will concede and say is that I think a lot of Gen Z haven't grown up in an era of shortages, right? The kids
Sure.
who grew up in the 80s and such like, they saw a lot of shortages, right? Pre-liberalization. I think that culture is largely reduced. I'm not saying it across all economic spectrums. There are economic spectrums in India that are still strivers, so to speak. But I think that has made things a little comfortable. Having said which, I think ambition is not out of the window. I just think that clarity of purpose in terms of what I want to be ambitious about has changed, right? It's no longer necessarily a corporate career and safety and security and owning a house and owning a car. I mean, I know when I work, like I said, closely with a lot of startups, I think living the experience is more important, right? Just the joy of ownership of, you can lease a car and you can rent a house, but you can still have a great lifestyle. So I think clarity is a little different. And I think Gen Z also wants to collect experiences, right? They just don't want to collect years on the job and, a fat, proud and fun. I think they want to get rich, have good experiences, but get it now. So I think, I'd say ambition, the rules have changed. The rules of ambition have changed.
True. Means I was saying that last thing on a lighter note because personally, I've heard this Gen Z doesn't work hard, doesn't come on time. But I've had the pleasure of working in last 4 years with at least 5 to 6 Gen Zs who they would work at an adaptable time. So I will log in at 2 a.m. and finish all the work. Do you mind? I'm going off at 6. That's fine. Means you can't say, no, you sit till 9 in the day office every day. So they want adaptability. But I've seen a lot of passion in Gen Z. Now I hand over to my Gen Z friend to ask the next question.
no, but I actually wanted to tell, as both of you said, that how unique mindset it has been when it comes to the millennials and Gen Zs. Building on
Mhm.
that, I just wanted to tell that beyond the consumer choices, if you think about the energy and the mindset of today's generation, what part of it excites you the most when you work with young founders or teams?
Great question, Bhavi. I would say the one that excites me most, and the reason why I've kind of consciously spend a lot of my time working with young founders and early stage startups, I think one is they don't take anything for granted, right? Someone like me who spent, say, almost 30 years in the corporate world, over time, you realize that a lot of things get done, right? A lot of your work is about setting direction and kind of calling out strategy and, kind of looking. I think here you can't take anything for granted, right? You come in as a individual contributor, who you were, what you did, your corporate success can be left outside. And therefore you got to prove yourself in every interaction. So that's, I think, one is refreshing. They don't take past for granted. So it's a very here and now culture. What I like a lot with startup founders is that they have a lot of much higher risk taking culture, right? A lot of us who worked through the 90s and early 2000s, everything was researched, well curated before we put anything out of the door, right? This is a beta culture saying, put it out. If you have to fail, fail fast, modify, change, succeed, right? So I think the ability to take risks, focus on speed, I think that's one area which is something I find very, very kind of refreshing and positive. And third is the ability to innovate, right? I think the fact that you don't have to wait for solutions that have been handed down over time, you can innovate, right? So there's no such thing as a best practice. If something works, well and good. If it doesn't, change it, move on. But always look for innovation. Look for a bit of how you can kind of get the job done. I think that's one big part. And I'd say the last point is really not being tarnished by failure. Right. And I want to say this upfront. I know a lot of people, who I've worked with, colleagues, juniors, were quite terrified of failure. Right. What if I do this, doesn't work? Right. It's going to stay in my biodata. People are going to talk about it. I think now people learn to move on. Right. A lot of pitches that I hear from founders talk about saying that this is their fourth startup. Right. The first two failed. The third was okay. We kind of had a reasonable exit, didn't make too much of money, but now we believe. And a lot of the investor community says, wow, now this guy's chances of success are higher because he knows what doesn't work. He's seen failure, or he's dusted himself up by his pants and now walking forward. So I think the lack of fear of failure is another extremely positive part of the whole Gen Z experience.
That's brilliantly put. I completely agree with you.
I was saying what both Gen Z and to some extent millennials has done, and it's an aside from marketing and all, is now corporates are also acceptable. The HR is acceptable of having a break of 6 months, a year. People saying, "Look, I was just going around the world," or I'd taken a break and gone off to in the Northeast. Previously, when I started my career, or even in 2000 and all, if you told that you had a 1.5 years break, it was an automatic grounds for rejection, saying, "No, what were you doing for? You're wasting your time." So it was like a waste. It's something which is interesting because it is also related to prosperity and a safety net, because people have a safety net. A lot of us started without a safety net. So it was not that we had a luxury of saying, I'm going off to, I met somebody recently who was in Malaysia for 2 months or 3 months just because she was feeling depressed. We couldn't have ever afforded to do that. We needed our jobs. So that's changed. It's also linked to how the times are moving and keeping the same conversation alive. What do you think? And to me, Lloyd is a marketer. Okay. He might be a lot of things. He's a business leader and everything, but he's a marketer. What do you think in 2030 good CMO would need? How would we define a CMO in 2030? And what would be the change from, say, 2020 to 2030 for a CMO?
Thanks for that, Sandeep. I think nice perspective. But yes, like I say, irrespective of the roles I do, I think I always believe that everyone should have done two things in life. One is a little bit of sales and certainly a little bit of marketing. And if you permit me to digress a bit, I think one is sales teaches you some of the hard knocks, right? It's nothing like trying to make a pitch to someone who tells you shows you the door, right? And I always believe that startup somewhere in the sales hierarchy, nothing like a few hard knocks, meeting people completely dissimilar to you, who tell you off, who scream at you, right? So then nothing really hurts you. And the joy of marketing for me has always been the fact that trying to understand people, right? I think understanding consumer is the best. And I always believe that, I know I'm speaking to a good researcher here, Sandeep, is the ability to actually go out and hear people firsthand, right? That nothing beats real insight when listening to real consumers. No amount of report or quality research or whatever can beat that aspect. So I think that's the two parts. Cutting to your question, 2030, 5 years away, things are changing so fast. It's difficult to predict global leaders next week. So 5 years and 1,800 days is a long way away. But broadly, I'd say two things. I think two things never changed in my mind. I think one is the art of storytelling. You're a marketer of 1970, 1980, 2030, 2040. I think the ability to convey a story in an interesting manner that makes people want to stop and listen, I think that will never go out of style, right? And for that to happen, I think a basic understanding of human psychology. Why is it that something that pulls at our heartstrings, we want to see that whole commercial, right? There's a 20-second spot, but if there's a small emotional moment, then you want to see it. Something that's either funny or something that interests you. So I think understanding a bit of consumer psychology, telling a story with either humor or with an emotional connect, I think these are two things that the marketer will need to. The tools will change, right? You might be able to personalize. I mean, three of us could be seeing the same TV show, the same cricket match. And Bobby could be seeing something interesting to her. Sandeep, you could be seeing something interesting to you. And I could be seeing something different, right? And that same product can have tweaks, right? They can talk about something that a Gen Z person values. They can talk about something that, let's say, a working professional values. I think the tools will change, but I think the ability to tell a story with interest, the ability to understand a consumer, that's not going to change in a hurry. And therefore, I think the marketing of 2030 will just have to be able to keep that skill relevant and learn the various zillions of tools that will come by that make that whole process easier.
But have a follow-up question. What's been happening from the friends in the advertising world and the media world is that a number of positions are going, especially with copywriters. With AI coming, you don't really need, and I'm kind of being facetious here. You don't need storytellers, so you get AI to give you the ideas and then you finalize. And I know somebody's let go of, out of a team of 10, he has got only 2 right now. How does that correlate with what you said about storytelling? And I completely buy into your point on storytelling, but people are just saying, I want a campaign, I want a digital campaign. Why do I need an Ogilvy? Why can't I do it myself?
I think the problem you state is real, right? So I won't, brush aside the problem. I think the reality is that today AI and digital tools can do a lot of things that you require large agencies to do, right? And that's real, right? And AI can create fairly compelling campaigns. It's pretty easy. I mean, I'm a fan of ChatGPT. I was in a school group on WhatsApp, and a friend was saying, at Onam, he tried 6 different kinds of Python. Sitting on my computer, I just typed a prompt on ChatGPT saying, give me a book cover, saying everything you want to know about Python, and didn't know who to ask. And I wrote that school friend's name, and I said, generate a cover. So on that WhatsApp chat, I quickly put a cover. And I said, yeah, have you written a book? I just found this on Amazon. And suddenly, everyone in the school group jumped and said, wow, have you written a book? Congratulations. And he said, yeah, man, where did you get this cover? I said, I saw it on Amazon. So it created a big controversy. It was nothing. It was just a ChatGPT prompt that said, show me a book with this title by so and so name. So you can create kind of real-time magic, and that's real. Having said which, I think the power of the judgment of a business person on what will work, what will not work, the timing, right? They say great comedy or great thing is also about timing. I think that won't go away, right? So I do believe there will be a crunch in terms of opportunities, right? As a small business owner, I will not have to go to a creative agency to generate my letterhead and create my first campaign. I can do it real time. I think the large global platforms, the Metas and the Googles, they encourage that, right? Today, a lot of businesses that Google search is getting, Meta across Facebook, Insta, etc., is real entrepreneurs directly relating to the company. it's like a menu driven, right? I decide I can spend 500 rupees today and I want exposure to 200 customers of this vintage and I will get that. So that's real, right? And therefore, I believe that the importance for people is to be able to roll with technology, right? You don't expect that the world will stop and allow you to grow your copywriting skills, right? That job might shrink, but being better at judging something, maybe working towards better prompts to get higher quality creative, understanding psychology, that is something that you have to work towards. But your current skill on job guarantee won't work. And we all learned it the hard way. For Bhavi's benefit, I began my career in FMCG sales in the 90s. Going to small towns, meeting distributors, selling, assessing their stocks, checking their bank credit worthiness was a big part of the job. Today, 80% of D2C brands don't do that at all. They just work with third-party logistics companies, right? You work with a delivery, you work with a third party, right? Express Bs. You don't need the depth of distribution. And you can still reach 70% of India's retailers, which Hindustan Lever and Colgate took 40, 50 years to build, right? So that's the reality. And therefore, a lot of skills will become redundant. But I think the ability to be able to repurpose yourself, reinvent yourself, I think that's something, that's a skill that everyone will have to learn, right? Gen Z possibly does it instinctively, but all of us have to learn irrespective of what age and what stage of life you are in.
Correct, absolutely. I would say, since you already mentioned about technology, AI coming to the picture, as somebody as young who is entering the market and where AI is at its peak, I would actually want to know that what, according to you, is that one emerging technology you believe is a little overhyped and one that is underappreciated, which we should also consider implementing.
The one technology in the last 5 years, Bhavi, that I see is overhyped and not delivered anywhere the hype has been the metaverse, right? The whole world jumped when Facebook Inc. changed their name to Meta, right? And put billions of dollars and such like. And we all thought that people will be living in this bubble of the metaverse and we'll be living through avatars and all that. And brands created metaverse sites, etc. I think a lot of that hype has not come to great value. I mean, there are experiences in terms of VR, AR built out of the metaverse that are nice, but I think people still value real world experiences, right? So I think the metaverse has been one big hype that's failed to deliver. On the other hand, I think the one that has become real is, I would say the whole concept of, AI, right? I mean, what ChatGPT, what Grok, what Google Gemini can do is remarkable. It's changing behavior of older people like me, right? You don't normally now, Google is not your first port of call, right? A lot of people I know have used Grok on Twitter. They use Google Gemini as their default option. And you always ask a question, right? Earlier on search, you kind of typed a few keywords and then you kind of scrolled, you saw, you looked at some sponsor plugs. So at least you made some amount of judgment. Now you simply ask a question and 9 or 10 times you take that answer as valid. Therefore, it's remarkable, right? And therefore, you also realize that you have to fine tune your question and then you have to go deeper. So you do a bit of stuff, but a lot of it is what you get as information. So information seeking has become easier. And I say that, some generations have moved from going to the library, then going to Google, now to going to ChatGPT or any AI engine as a default. And in due course, the worry is you'll also outsource a lot of thinking, right? And that's where I believe is going to affect a little bit of our mental skills, because the ability to process data and arrive at a conclusion sometimes is the one part that you don't want to outsource.
Correct.
Right? You want a lot of AI to do the mundane, relieve you of all the routines, do my travel expenses, pay my bills, do all that stuff. But I still want the joy of thinking, right? I want to watch a movie, I want to cry, I want to laugh. I don't want ChatGPT to do that for me. So I guess that's the part.
So now taking you somewhere else, which is, you talked about you being somebody who takes insights and gets them, uses them well. So tell us once where insight in your life, in your business life, was it a conflict with what you or the CEO or the CMO felt and said, this doesn't seem right? So, and how did you take it forward? And
so essentially what you're asking is where you think insight failed? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, insight might have been right, but if the CEO or the CMO feels this is the way to go, then very often the company goes that way rather than what the inside is telling you to go.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So I think prima facie, there have been moments when, data seems to be pointing at one direction, but your gut tells you that maybe that doesn't work, right? So I believe that, to a large extent, go deeper into data, there may be a truth buried somewhere, right? But yes, you're right. As in, there's a famous quote, I think attributed to Steve Jobs, I'm not sure he made it, saying that if you ask people what kind of a phone they want, they will always give you an incremental product, right? Back in the time, they had asked you for a better Nokia version with more ease of use. But someone has to take the leap into the next level, right? So therefore, the iPhone was almost at a time when people said, will older people be able to manage touch? A whole generation of working executives grew on BlackBerry. They wanted a ASDF GF keyboard. And suddenly iPhone came and took the market by storm. Another example, I think, as it always happens, ends up with an Apple example, was again the creation of the iPod, right? When music was a little bit of a search and find, just having a seamless slab with, a circuit, which is a keypad, which help you choose your songs. So I think, yes, I would say there are moments that you have to go with gut. I can think of two examples I've seen in my career, both of which I've not been directly involved. I think one was the whole concept of the creation of sachets. Right? This happened in the 80s. Suddenly, the feeling was that people who live in lower economic circumstance in the juggies of Delhi and so on will not be able to afford premium shampoos, right? Which was in a sense true. But the moment you created the small 50 paise, 1 rupee pack, suddenly you found that a lot of premium varieties of shampoos were actually selling, right? So the aspiration to use something premium was there. Maybe I don't wash my hair 7 days a week. I wash it thrice, but I want to do it with the best quality shampoo I get, right? So I think there are moments where you have to kind of jump and say, how do I breach that? I would say another pivotal moment for all of us in India has been the 2016-17 when Jio launched, right? We always thought that, people in India only want free calls. Calls are what you use a phone for. Be a small, 5% of India which will be wanting data. I mean, in 2 years, the lowest cost of data in the world made a whole generation of us internet addicts, right? You can seldom go anywhere in the country where people are not looking down on their phones, right? And this is across economic classes. I mean, I have this little thing which, say 6, 7, maybe before 2017, you drive into any condo, any building late in the night, the guard would typically be asleep, right? He's had a long day at work, etc. He's possibly doing 2 jobs. Now he's watching YouTube videos, right? So I think that, and that again, to my mind, was something that people didn't expect, right? People said internet will always be a top 5%, 10% phenomena. Today, 70% of India has, is watching reels, is watching YouTube shorts, etc. So I think sometimes one has to go against the grain of data and go with what one feels. I can give one example, Sandeep, that you may be possibly aware. I think it was a time when Pepsi bought over the Duke's company in Mumbai, right? Yeah. Now, the product Mangola was a big favorite in Bombay, and Mangola was always made in a heat that was not very production friendly. It was post pasteurized. The mango juice was bottled, and then hundreds of bottles were put in an urn, and they were heated and then cooled, because that's how they ensure that they stay good enough in the market for 1-2 months. And the traditional business of making mango products, so there was Maza, there was Slice, all the other mango drinks. They were heated as a liquid and then filled into bottles. So they were pre-pasteurized as opposed to being post-pasteurized. And there was a huge taste difference. So research showed that there was a huge taste difference, right? And the manufacturing guy said, no, there's a big cost of production, because when you're taking bottles and putting them into an oven, there's breakages, there's loss, production is low. But as a business, we went with the Mangola technique, saying that, it's a brand that has been built over 60 years by the Pandole family. We are inheritors of that. If we want to keep our market leadership in Bombay with Mangola being 5 times the size of Maza, we have to go with a slightly antiquated production technique. And it worked. And, and Mangola continued to be market leaders for various times. So sometimes you've got to let a human intuition override numbers and research.
So, any last question from you, Bhavi? I have one question.
Okay. Since you said so much, you gave so many of insights about different brands. That brings me to something that is linked with your global brand experience. Since you've worked with so many global brands, one last question that pops as a Gen Z is how to build relevance instead of chasing trends.
I think it's a very tough ask, Bhavi. I think, like I said, if your product or brand is not relevant to people's lives, then people will tend to dismiss it, right? And therefore, while it's very easy to chase trends, right? We all wake up and say, this is the new thing. Labubu dolls is the new thing. Can I do something around it? But does your business, does your brand have any real connect with them, right? If you're a fashion product, if you're selling handbags and you want to ride on the Labubu dolls theme, you got a story, right? It works well. There's a bit of a story. But if you're in a completely different category, maybe there's absolutely no relevance, right? So don't try to force fit a trend. Like I said, staying authentic, staying true to your product core, and telling your story in a real manner is far better than jumping a trend. The other point that I also therefore want to caution is that very often there is the need to quickly get influencers to tell a story, right? And I think in that hurry, a lot of brands miss the point that if the influencer is not going to add value by his own persona or by his own following, then don't jump the bandwagon. I can tell you a story of a reasonably large D2C cosmetics company. They were jumping the bandwagon quickly to getting fashion influencers. And as you know that in Instagram, you throw a stone and you'll hit a few fashion influencers. So they're all over the place. One of the startups that I was involved with did the research for them. They found that of the top 10 lady influencers, who they were hiring for cosmetics, 9 of them had more than a 80% male fan following, right? Who are unlikely to buy cosmetics for themselves and less likely to buy cosmetics for their spouses or their girlfriends. And it seemed very obvious, right? So you realize that a lot of the influencers was using, slightly wild content to attract followers. And those followers are not relevant to the cosmetic world. It's the moment you do a little bit of authenticity, a little bit of research, you realize that, a lot of influencers are buying influence, right? It's very easy to do that, right? And therefore I'm saying using a little science to go deeper and try to understand. So it's much better for that brand to have an influencer with 400 followers in a town of Trichy in Tamil Nadu, out of which about 250 actually believe that her ability to use cosmetics is classy, has far more relevance than this influencer with 1 million followers, out of which 970,000 are males who are just, there to kind of admire her. Right. So I think therefore that's one of the things to kind of look at very seriously.
That's great takeaway, I would say. Honestly, I would move forward, Sandeep.
Sure, means he's been giving us a lot of great takeaways. So last, and to summarize, you've been talking about authenticity and staying authentic, which is a critical thing. But any 2 or 3 takeaways from today's marketers? What should they focus on? What kind of companies do you think will make it? Like Whole Truth has been a relatively out of the blue kind of thing, which is done.
Which one? Say that again.
Whole Truth. So means pick up something, stick to it, including service. It's not that if you just say that we're a great brand and so what are 2 or 3 takeaways for today's marketers for Indian market?
I will say spend as much time understanding your customer, right? And when I say customer, it's not always the end user. Sometimes it also means the intermediary, right? If it's your retailer and distributor. I think understanding what role your product plays in that customer's lives, how important it is important. And also making sure that if there are any shortcomings, any changes, not just in the product, but also in the delivery or the service levels, I think that is the one most critical. 2, I think in the digital world, and specifically the younger marketeers, I think what we often ignore is customer experience. A great product is only as good as the entire experience, right? So what does the consumer, how does he experience it at various points? Is it portable? Can it fit into my handbag? Is it something that I can take onto an aircraft? So I think looking at the whole 9 yards would be good. The third, and I'm kind of digressing for a second with your permission, is also that I would say our Gen Z marketeers it's important to read the room, right? Very often you're called upon to make a presentation to the board or to a senior bunch of people or to a customer. I think there is a certain joy of being who you are and authentic, but there are moments when you have to conform, right? And I have, one example that, I always remember, it was a brand that I have a small investment in, that founder was looking for an introduction to a large company. And I did introduce him to somebody at a very senior level at ITC at their Bangalore office. And, so this founder went dressed very, very casually, right? Distressed jeans and, kind of flip flops and such like. Now, I tell him that, look, I understand that when at a startup office, casualness is the norm. A lot of VCs like that. They like that hands-on, collarless t-shirt kind of approach, which is good. But I said very often there's some old rules of selling that when you go to a formal company, let the customer feel like he's meeting one of his types, right? And I said very often that tends to come in the way. And these are just traditional skills, right? As a salesperson, you want to look like someone who belongs to that company. So I also say that don't take the customer for granted, right? The world as of now is not entirely Gen Z. You're still going to be having to deal with millennials. You're still going to have to deal with Gen X. You might even occasionally have your parents and beyond who are baby boomers. So I think the recognition that there is a world outside of that cohort is important, both for your personal success and as a marketer or as a business person, that you have to be able to, at some point in time, conform, right? You still go back to your normal life, but there are moments, and that's not putting on an act. That's just staying respectful and staying in the moment, right? You have to be there. And that's an advice that I keep, sharing with all the founders and all the startups I work with, is saying there are times that you have to adapt, right? Tools always don't use to your advantage. But the power equation of life is such. We are who we are. So sometimes you have to put on the gloves and the pads and, play serious stuff. And sometimes you can play gully cricket, but learn to play. I said, stay the course, right? For T20, you bat differently. For ODIs, you bat differently. For tests, you bat differently. For gully cricket, you bat differently. So I always say that learn to understand that and take fresh guard every time.
Yeah, true. Anything else? Anything you want to add? Anything that you want to ask, Bobby?
Feel free, Bhavin. Absolutely.
That pretty much sums up, and I would definitely vouch that I got to learn, and it was some great insights which I feel somebody young and Gen Z like me is going to relate to. And that's it.
Lovely chatting with you, Bhavin. Please. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
That was mine. Always enjoyed. And yeah, feel free. Good.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice